Hey, Kuhu.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay.
Hi, Vikas.
Hi, Vikas. Put on your video and
Yes, done so. Hi.
Hi,
wow.
Vikas. How are you?
Fine. How are you? Are you back in Australia now?
Yeah, I'm in Australia, in Adelaide, in the south.
Okay. So not
Yeah.
in Melbourne, which is the hotspot at the moment.
No, luckily we're okay here. We don't have any cases actually in this state. So we're lucky. Yeah.
That's
Fingers
good.
crossed.
Yeah. I wish the same for you all.
Yes. Let me see if I can share the screen as well.
Yeah.
Hey, Vikas, you've got a fantastic background.
Yes, I was taking my calls from one place or the other. So I just set the background because sometimes I'm sitting in the drawing room, sometimes I'm sitting at my desk. So this kind of, I don't have to show what is there in the background.
Yeah. Good
Oh,
idea.
you can do that. I have to learn from you.
Yeah, you can do that. Is my screen visible now?
Yes.
Yep. That's fine. Maybe just make it. Is that the PDF? Yeah.
Yes, that's
Okay. Can you make it full screen or hide this, the preview, or if not, it doesn't matter?
trying to do that, but this PDF doesn't allow me to show the full screen. There's not there, that icon is not there.
Oh.
Yeah, now is it okay?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
perfect. Yep. Really
Perfect.
great.
Perfect.
So you can just leave that up if you want, and we'll just leave that as the backdrop.
Yes. Wait a minute.
Just making sure that it's recording. When she started this study, it was pre-COVID, and it very quickly became evident that she was going to have to kind of embrace a kind of a new way of doing things. So she did that, and I think that the focus on understanding how COVID has impacted and will impact the private sector engagement is also really interesting and important. So a little bit about Vikas. She has more than 20 years of experience in guiding sustainability efforts for private sector and development organisations, overseeing design and implementation of strategies and goals. And she's launched programs and initiatives to ensure that companies uphold and work towards finding new, innovative and economical methods to stay green and sustainable. And she's currently head of consulting firm Boundless Environment Resource Solutions and is a member of the ACIAR SDIP steering committee, where her role is to guide and support the program's engagement with the private sector. And just a couple of housekeeping rules. Please keep your microphone on mute unless you're invited to comment or ask a question. Kuhu, my colleague Kuhu, will moderate a question session following Vikas's presentation. And if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please do this in the chat box, and Kuhu will then invite you to speak and comment afterwards. We've kept it as a presentation format so that we can have a bit more interaction at the end. Okay, I'd like to pass over to Vikas now to start her presentation. Thank you, Vikas.
Thanks, Tamara, and good morning and welcome to everybody. I would say that it was a great learning opportunity for me as well to kind of have interviews and conduct research with the private sector and development sector and civil society organizations completely over the phone or the net. So it was a completely new learning curve for me. And because I believe, and I still believe that the kind of in-person interactions actually improves the quality of the rapport building and also sometimes the quality of the research. That said, let me proceed by my presentation and the findings I have had. And I would try to keep this succinct and brief because I want to focus more on the questions people may have and how do we approach the private sector engagement in the Eastern Gangetic Plain. Some of the learnings would be for India, but the broad brush learnings would be applicable for Nepal and Bangladesh as well. So I would welcome questions from Bangladesh and Nepal colleagues as well. So to proceed further, this is what the report structure was all about, but let's kind of go for the, I would actually omit the executive summary here and go to the research, because if I go to the executive summary, I would leave the cat out of the bag. So I would focus first on the work that was there and the background that was there. So the ACIAR SDIP program, which most of us over here are familiar with, I would deliberately now slow down because usually when I'm speaking, I speak very fast, and I've been told that I need to speak a little slower. So the ACIAR SDIP program is focused on promoting sustainable farming technologies based on specifically on conservation agriculture, identify effective institutional arrangements, explore biophysical and socioeconomic constraints to change the agricultural systems, because agricultural systems, as we all know from South Asia, are passed from one generation to the other almost like an oral history. And most often than not, the small and medium-sized farmer actually learns all about agriculture from his preceding generations or her generations, and also synthesize the wider context of water and energy within the food system, because how much water and energy is consumed to produce 1 unit of food has become very, very imperative in the South Asia region, because all the three countries in South Asia that we are looking at, Bangladesh, India, and Nepal, are actually going through a water crisis which will intensify in the next couple of decades. The progress till date for the ACIAR SDIP program has been that it has built a deep understanding of the biophysical and the socioeconomic settings. Work has been undertaken to see how effectively institutions can work in collaboration, and opportunities have been created for regional engagement. We have been meeting people in Bangladesh and Nepal and India frequently to understand what works and what does not. And on a sheer numbers scale, more than 100,000 farmers and farming households have been impacted by new practices, and they've added a substantial amount of increase in their farm level profits. Carbon dioxide mitigation has happened, and so has the per unit consumption of water in production of the same amount of food. The reason for doing this study, as I said earlier, was also to build an understanding of the funding and the corporate environment of EGP. Explore what stakeholders exist and how the EGP program could actually partner with the corporate sector, and identify the priorities of these stakeholders. Though many stakeholders in India may have a perspective of working in agriculture, they may or may not be focused on Eastern Gangetic Plain. They may have a completely different idea of what they want to do in agriculture. So identifying those avenues of collaboration was one of the key focus areas of the study. This was, as I said, due to COVID, it was primarily a desk-based research, but it was not just secondary reports and secondary literature. In-person interviews over Zoom were conducted between 22nd March and 1st of June. And also what I found was that in the same organization, I had to go rank and file, like the chief or the head of sustainability or corporate social responsibility may understand agriculture in one way, while the rank and file of the person who was implementing or disbursing grants may be very different. So I had to speak to rank and file of the people in the same organization to understand how they were looking at agriculture sector and what were they looking at post-COVID as a investment in the agricultural sector. So how was the specific stakeholders identified? These were organizations or institutions who had a stake in the agricultural sector, either because they were producing products or services that were important for the agricultural sector, or they were selling products and services that were important for that sector. And significantly, they were also organizations who may not have had a direct link to agricultural sector, but they were buying things or products which fell into their product lines. And government agencies were also interviewed because they have a big stake in how the policies are set and how the programs at the government level are rolled out. Civil society organizations were important to understand as to what was their perspective in COVID and post-COVID when they were designing their programs and their grant portfolios. How were the identification of private sector taken? So what I found was it was important to identify that the farmer and the farming system actually is dependent upon energy, water, food, air, topsoil, land, technology, and machinery. So this was immediate stakeholders. Then we had the immediate corporate sector, second degree corporate sector, and third degree corporate sector. Now, third degree corporate sector did not have something directly linked to the farming sector, but had dependency on the farming sector. So these were the FMCG sectors, tertiary food processing sectors like jams, chips, concentrates, etc., essential oils, etc. And in the second degree corporate sector, these were people who were buying commodities in bulk and then supplying to the third degree corporate sector. There were also sellers like the FMCG or the white goods sector. The immediate corporate sector was my focus because these were the organizations that were completely codependent on the farming and the farming produce that was produced in the farms of Eastern Gangetic Plain. So if you look at the stakeholders or specific stakeholders in the government sector, I focus on Jivika program of Bihar government's rural livelihood program, funded and partnered with also BMGF and World Bank, public sector organizations with stake in the sustainable agriculture across the country, National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development, NABARD, and I believe they're counterparts of NABARD or something similar in Bangladesh and Nepal as well. So probably it will be applicable there as well. And Indian Farmers Fertilizers Private Limited, IFCO. IFCO works more like a government NGO, but till about a couple of decades ago, it was a government-owned entity, and now it has become more like a government-owned NGO. So first, before kind of looking at why and how much of corporate funding does Eastern Gangetic Plain attract, let's look at what is the value of Eastern Gangetic Plain from an economic vibrancy perspective. Because I say that the corporate sector invests more in those areas, even in corporate social responsibility, which have a larger chunk of their financial influence in their products and services, either buying or selling. I know this may sound a little, self-serving from the civil society perspective, but that's a reality. The kind of funding that Maharashtra in India or Gujarat in India get from corporate social responsibility is very different from the corporate funding that Orissa and Bihar attract. So one has to recognize this reality, and that's the reason it is important to look at economic vibrancy of these states. So let's look at the net state domestic product for various states of India, and I've put them according to rank. And I marked the Eastern Gangetic Plain states in red: West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, and Bihar. Now, unfortunately, if you look at it, the states which have the highest national state domestic product, like Delhi and Goa, are actually not agricultural states, so we can choose to ignore them at the moment. While Karnataka, Telangana, Kerala, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and Andhra are actually good states which manufacture a lot of agricultural produce, but West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, and Bihar, which do have a large percentage of population involved in agriculture, are not important from the perspective of national state domestic product. Going further, if we look at the percentage of business contribution towards national business output, the national business output is configured by government spending, civil society spending, personal spending. But let's look at these three states again from the business contribution towards national state domestic product. Again, here we see Bihar's rank is 17th, West Bengal's rank is 11th, and Uttar Pradesh rank is 5th, meaning that the business in these areas is also not doing very well, so that even if it is local funding that is to be attracted for CSR, that is also limited. While Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Andhra Pradesh, which have a huge contribution towards national state business contribution towards the national levels, and these three states even are not important from that perspective. Now, agriculture is a percentage of state gross domestic product. Now, Maharashtra is so very highly industrialized, and so is Tamil Nadu, that agriculture is less than 7% or 10% of the national percentage of the state domestic product. While Gujarat, it is 16%, while West Bengal, it's 16%. Bihar and Uttar Pradesh are respectively 20% and 23%. That means that these states have a very important stake in agriculture because it influences their state gross domestic product and also has a large percentage of population involved in agriculture. Unfortunately, when you have a lower state gross domestic product, you also have a lower human development index. So let's look at the human development index for the three states that we were looking at: Bihar, West Bengal, and UP. They have the lowest human development index in India, and state-wise CSR spending, and we'll go to the next page, which actually captures that, is also the lowest. So let's compare these states on the HDI rank, ease of doing business, national state domestic product, and the CSR fund allocation. The higher the human development index, generally higher the ease of doing business, generally higher the national state domestic per capita product, higher the rank of CSR allocation as well. So it's like a triple whammy. If you're poor, you do not contribute to the national state development index, you have a lower net domestic gross product, you have a lower spending as well, you have lower attraction of the new capital that comes into the state for business. Hence, from all these counts, the states continue to be backwards and do not attract corporate funding or state funding to that extent. Now let's look at this EGP states from the importance of the gross domestic product growth prospect. What are we looking at from the future perspective? Now this was a research done by McKinsey, and they found that the share of incremental GDP across clusters by quartile, if you look at it, the states of EGP, West Bengal, UP, and Bihar, do not rank even higher from a futures perspective, that their ability to be attracting funding for business vibrancy is lower compared to the India. The entire India is a subcontinent. The western side, the Gujarat, Maharashtra, and the southern sides, Kerala, Andhra, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, will attract a huge percentage of the business investment into the states, vis-a-vis compared to the eastern Gangetic plain. So look at the states with the top and the bottom investment potential. As I said, the Gujarat, Maharashtra, Andhra, and Tamil Nadu will attract more investment for business compared to Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, and West Bengal. So the relevance, what I'm trying to say here is that the business relevance for EGP is even smaller. And that we will see as we go along. If we see, when I interviewed the corporate sector, and I found that big companies, the FMCG sector companies, and even companies which supply white goods, they do not consider the Eastern UP, Bihar, and West Bengal important from a business perspective, because for the total share of business that they get at the country level, these states are sometimes less than 5%. So their focus is also not these states as well. So from an overall business health, as I said, EGP does not contribute more than 10 to 12%. Less than 10% of national sales agri-machinery companies are from EGP. The sales for even the agri-machineries is not high in these states. National procurement of agricultural commodities from EGP is less than 10 to 12%. Sales of national white goods is less than 5 to 8%. Hence, it's a combined, a downward spiral of poverty, poor governance, mindsets, corruption, and government policy of loan waivers, land acquisition, and labor laws, which does not make EGP attractive for funding of business funding especially. Before we go further on what the CSR impact has been, let's look at what the COVID-19 impact has been. And all these research that I have taken here were valid till May of this year. I believe this number $15 years. So what has been the COVID-19 impacts on agricultural sector? So what we have found is that if you start looking at from Q4 2024 and how the recovery of actually the agricultural sector will happen is that the most likely scenario is that we will start to recover in the Q4 of 2021. Till then, we will continue with stop and start of the containment zones. The pandemic can be resolved via vaccine development, treatment that reduces mortality rate, and discovery that true mortality rate is significantly lower. So we are looking at a U or a W-shaped recovery. What we are finding is that if you look at the supply challenges, the demand challenges, and the pricing challenges of the agricultural sector, supply chain disruptions will happen. The ability to transport agricultural produce, the stressed farmer economies because of the reduced farmer incomes, and potential increase in cost of inputs is definitely going to impact the supply challenges. The demand challenges are going to be impacted by the reduction in overall domestic demand because the lowered household incomes, people are losing jobs, incomes are not stable, and the global demand is also reducing for refined or high quality produce. So demand challenges will also increase. Pricing challenges, pricing volatility will happen, and heightened exchange of rate volatility will impact the imports and the exports of the value products that India produces. We are expecting a net 33% drop in the net farmer household incomes. And what will happen is that 17 million farmers identified in focus clusters will have a drop in crop and location combinations and will face a disproportionate impact. Supposing if you're growing mangoes or if you're growing rice, the impact will be different, but the farm income for the farm household will decrease. And given this Eastern Gangetic Plain is a poorer location, the impact will be more severe there. In India alone, the decline is expected to be 4.4 trillion INR, and this is going to result in 470 million metric tons of decline in produce, decrease in farm gate prices, and aggregate demand for agricultural crops is projected to decline from 580 million metric tons to by about 12% in 2020, 11% in 2021, and about 8% in 2022. So they are expecting that the return of the normal for agricultural sector will not take place before 2023. That said, what is the impact that we are going to find in various kinds of fruit and vegetable crops? We're expecting a 1.2 trillion value decline in 2020 for fruits and vegetables, and plantation crops will account for 0.2 trillion value loss. The major loss will be in the states of Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh in fruits and vegetables and plantation crops, and will result in 55% of total value loss and will impact 17 million farmers. So the agricultural interventions that are required would be minimize supply chain disruptions, bolster demand for agricultural produce, manage price volatility, work with farmers to improve household level incomes. There, the work done by ACIAR, SDIP will become very important, and reverse the migration. Post-COVID, and that's true for Bangladesh and Nepal, I believe as well, is that lots of migrant labor that were working in other states are going back to their home states, which will put their home states in a combined stress of more mouths to feed from the same unit of land. And also the poverty numbers will increase further because the land is not that productive. So funding available for civil society, COVID-19 impacts. The government funds are increasing. And let's look at, as we go further, we will see how it is impacting. The CSR fund, what impact it will have. Funding available via international non-government organizations and bilaterals as well. Crowdsourcing or other mechanisms for raising funds. So what's happening on the government's funds on the COVID-19? Government is coming up with new programs to look at creation of warehouses, cold storages, primary collection centers, primary processing centers, Government is also looking to establish micro enterprise fund to look at a cluster-based approach for pulses, rice, etc. A top to total fund has been established by Government of India that plans to give 50% subsidy for farmers to be able to transport their goods to markets. The design of these programs will be primarily undertaken by Ministry of Rural Development, Ministry of Agriculture and NITI Aayog. So ACIAR SDIP has an opportunity to engage with these ministries to see that the funds and the funds allocation is in a manner that it impacts the Eastern Gangetic Plain as well. Pardon. ACIAR could also facilitate coalition of non-government organizations to influence the Government of India and the Government of India allocation of funds. What has happened with CSR funds and financial recovery? What we're finding is that the CSR funds in India are actually an average of last 3 years CSR allocations that the corporate sector has. As the COVID-19 hit India in March of 2020, this year's CSR funds will not be impacted. It will impact because the business will be impacted this year and next year. The allocation of CSR funds in 2021 and 2022 will be severely impacted. But unfortunately, even for the funds allocated this year, about companies are spending 25 to 50% of the CSR funds on COVID-19 response. As a consequence, funding available for new CSR programs or new CSR partners is almost negligible. That said, companies are also looking to design programs to influence agricultural sector, to reverse migration, to look at how manufacturing can be controlled and managed better. But manufacturing will be impacted with the reduction of 30 to 50%. So business allocation of CSR funding will be severely impacted in the next year and the year after. So companies civil society dependent upon CSR will have to see how they're going to manage this reduction in CSR funding. Targeted COVID-19 funding to international NGOs has increased, but this is only for COVID-19. Funds have been raised in India as well. This has created donation fatigue in the regular donors. Hence, there are no new making funding resources that can be harnessed. My single point advice to civil society that's looking to look at COVID-19 funding is, if they can design agricultural based funding or agricultural based programs that also look at COVID-19's impact, their ability to attract new CSR funding or international organizations funding would be much higher. Funding like via bilateral and multilateral donors. They are also now partnering with Government of India programs like a World Bank or a UNICEF, or DFID has now merged with their Department of International Trade, is that the funding available by bilateral donors is reducing, and they're willing to partner more with the Government of India programs than come on as individual funding for smaller programs. An example of this is Jivika. The program is funded by the state government, the national government, World Bank, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Direct funding by bilateral and multilateral funds to regional and local society organizations is an exception. It's not the rule anymore. You will find very few NGOs who are getting direct funding from World Bank or bilaterals. So the inference, opportunities of conservation agriculture based sustainable intensification and to improve household income. What civil society organizations can do actually is minimize supply chain disruptions, bolster demand for agricultural produce, manage price volatility, financial recovery, but CSR funding will decrease, and we will have to see how do we manage the next 24 to 36 months. That's basically my presentation, and I'm happy to look at questions now.
Thank you, Vikas. You've given us a lot to think about, lots of challenges, but opportunities as well to work together with other people. So I haven't received questions please, if you have any questions, you can put it on the chat.
I have a question if no one else does, just for the moment. Because you described the kind of context, you know, why there's a lack of investment, and some of those are the kind of the policy settings in each state. What do you think would be the single kind of change that would make, or one change that would make investment more attractive to the private sector in those states?
Tamara, unfortunately, it cannot be one single change. The ease of doing business in Eastern UP, in Bihar and West Bengal, and for people who are from India would know that corporate funding or corporate investment in these states is very poor. And that can be it can be many reasons. The ease of doing business, the government's ability to overtake or abolish existing policies or abolishing existing contracts that they may have had with corporate sector. The level of commitment that the private sector wants from the government when they're starting new projects. The arbitrariness of the governments to suddenly come up with, say, that 50% or 75% of the employment has to be local. Or the aiding and abetting of local leaders of civil unrest against the companies is what makes companies very wary of investing in these states. So it's not a single thing, I would say, but I would say it's a complex situation. The only way I would think that it can be tackled by the Eastern Gangetic Plain states is that you will have to lead by example. Get a company and give it enough scope to do work, but also maintain a sustainable agenda. Sustainability is an agenda, and reduce corruption in the way the licenses are issued, managed, and upheld by both the corporate sector and the government sector. People who are from the civil society in this on this call from this area, if you would want to add to this understanding of mine.
Okay, if not more, I have a question from Dr. K.K. Das. Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, do.
Couple of quick questions, not only one. Yeah. Okay, then. Thank you. Yeah. Vikas ji. Yeah. Namaste. This is T.P. Tiwari from Nepal.
Namaskar.
Yeah. I mean, I fully enjoyed your presentation. Yeah. Thank you very much once again. And one thing I would like to know that yes, certainly there will be decline in food production. There is no doubt. Yeah. And you have come up with some figures. Okay.
Yes.
So my question is, what is the basis of calculating that figure? And what is the basis, basis of your estimation? That is one. And the other one is that you mentioned that this government and the CSR fund will be increased in the succeeding years, yeah? In the coming years.
No,
so,
CSR,
sorry.
Continue.
And what proportion of that fund will go to the private sector?
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. So the basis of my estimation of impact on the growth of agricultural sector is the report done by TechnoServe, because they are the technical agricultural economist experts. I have provided a link in my presentation. So I would suggest if Kuhu can share that link with you, and you can have a look at how they have calculated the numbers. They have done a deep dive and a deep research onto that. That's one. Secondly, looking at government and CSR funds increase. Now that's where I have, I think so I was not very clear. Government funds will increase for the agricultural sector via the subsidies provided, via the programs that they're looking like the top 2 total programs and agricultural reviving funds. The CSR funds unfortunately will decrease because the business is not doing well this year. And CSR funds are actually an average of the last 3 years, 2% average of the last 3 years business profits. If profits are not good this year, and the next year, then the CSR funds will definitely decrease. So government funding to agricultural sector may increase via different programs, while CSR funds will come down. Now, you have asked me if government and CSR funds will go to the private sector. CSR funds can be spent by the private sector, but are meant only for uplifting or charitable or philanthropic activities or sustainability activities in India. They cannot go back to the private sector as a profit. Government funds for agriculture are targeted towards improving the agricultural productivity and marketing, establishing a product to market linkages. So they will go to private sector, supposing if it's improving of the, warehousing or cold storages or establishing marketing linkages, their private sector will have a role to play to see that how the marketing services can be connected to the manufacturers or the growers of various kinds of agricultural produce. So that's the way that the different kinds of funding will work out.
Okay.
Thank you.
TP, thanks TP. Because there are a couple of questions on the supply chain management, one from Bangladesh and one from India. Dr. Das and Jahangir Alam, they are asking is, how can the supply chain disruptions or management be made better and not open to corruption, or do you have any view on that?
See, the supply chain management and looking at how it can be, the corruption can be reduced. The one thing that I've seen work in India and in Bangladesh as well, and to a certain extent in Nepal as well, has been the forming of farmer-producer organizations. When farmer-producer organizations are formed and they themselves are able to qualify and categorize their produce as per the quality of the produce, and then establish slowly over the time linkages with directly the customer, then and reducing the middlemen in the chain, the corruption reduces and the revenue or the remuneration to the farmer increases. But that requires a lot of collaboration between the farmers, and sometimes the civil society acts as a glue to bring it together. Even if you look at Satmile, which is an ACIR SDIP partner, they have been able to do it because they've been able to coalesce the farmers together. Initial years, the Satmile group has been able to give them a kind of a support, technical and intellectual, but thereafter, after a point, they have to just come independently and coalesce together and run it like a business.
Okay, thanks, Vikas. A question from Robin. Is there any, in your view, is there any coordination between the government and the private sector CSR programs for COVID response?
See, here I would say again, organizations like ACIR play a big role, and smaller implementation NGOs also play a big role. Government will not give money to private sector. Private sector will not give money to government of the CSR funding. It's a very, very rare exception. Like for COVID-19, people may give it to Prime Minister's Relief Fund. But typically, an implementation NGO can access government funding and access private sector funding and access other kinds of funding to implement a program. So it can be a co-designed program where multiple stakeholders can design a program, and different line items of the budget are funded by different stakeholders. Like even if you look at the top to total program, the civil society can come in as to getting the farmers to form a farmer producer organization. The government can come in with funding of the warehouse. Well, the private sector can come in to establish the linkage, or with the CSR funds to look at how the warehouse can be maintained, and the farmer producer organization be trained to manage and run the warehouse in a profitable manner.
Okay. One of our Bangladeshi colleagues has asked that, can you comment on the comparative picture between production and post-production cases? In Bangladesh, production was not that much disrupted, but the marketing was, but it is recovering now. Do you have any view on the situation in Bangladesh?
See, from what little I know of Bangladesh, the production may not have been impacted as you rightly said, but the linkage to the market has been disrupted because of the transportation and transportation shortages. Now, in the interim, when the production is high, but there's no way to guarantee that the food wastage doesn't happen or the agricultural commodity wastage doesn't happen, the prices will be impacted. That's one. Secondly, because you cannot transport your goods, the income of the lower farmer will also get impacted. So that's probably the reason that Indian government has come up with a funding for warehousing and also for the cold storages and transportation. Similarly, I believe for Bangladesh as well, working on these areas will be very important. The fortunate part between Nepal, Bangladesh and India is that our geography and the way our governments work is similar, though not the same. So the options chosen by one government probably can work with little tweaking in the other country as well. That said, the food shortage because of food wastage is an issue with all three countries. So that's something the three countries will need to manage.
Thanks, because I had a question of mine. You did mention that the crowdfunding, it could be a source of, supplementing the existing projects. So do you have any experience in crowdsourcing to add to the kitty? Because it seems the whole bucket is getting smaller. So do you have any experience of crowdsourcing?
See, this is the first pandemic that the whole world is facing. So if I look from a communications perspective and look at COVID-19, and if you look at any, disaster has three principles when you're looking at disaster. One is relief, which is in the first 6 months. In this case, it will continue for the next 2 years because it's a pandemic. Then there is rehabilitation, and then there's reconstruction and rehabilitation. So in COVID's case, relief will continue for 2 years. The reconstruction phase, because nothing needs to be constructed, it's not a disaster like an earthquake or a tsunami, where public and civil structures have demolished. Rehabilitation is something that people will need to focus on from civil society's perspective and attract COVID response funding. That is for farmers whose incomes have been reduced, or because the linkage between the market and the producer has been disrupted. How can you design a program where crowd is interested to fund it because they want to improve the COVID rehabilitation space? So the communication has to be that this is still a COVID response, but it's a COVID rehabilitation space where people are interested to fund it to improve over a longish period of time. Unfortunately, across the world, and this is not true for just India or Bangladesh or Nepal, usually post-disaster, most individuals, governments, private sector are very willing to spend on the relief phase because it provides immediate high to these funders and also provide a lot of photo opportunities. The challenge is to get funding for the rehabilitation phase, where consistent funding is required, consistent effort is required, and the results take 3 to 5 years to come in. Unfortunately and fortunately, I would say both, COVID provides us with this example. So communication and designing of a program from a perspective saying that post-COVID-19, these programs are post-COVID-19 recovery programs. So people have suffered from COVID. How are they going to recover from the economic disaster that's happened? So the programs will have to be designed in that manner.
Okay.
And example, sorry, I forgot about that part of the example of it.
Yeah.
So post such disaster, when the earthquake struck, relief happened. But after the relief, a community organization was formed for the Kutch rehabilitation. Now, interestingly, you would find that Kutch has so many people staying outside of the country that one of the districts of Kutch has, one of the blocks of Kutch actually had the highest, the money available in fixed deposits in the country. this was an eye-opener for all of people who are working in rehabilitation, because so many people from Kutch were staying outside the country and reinvesting in fixed deposits in that particular block. When we started to design a program of rehabilitation for the entire Kutch, these were the individuals we could reach out to invest into the Community Foundation for Kutch, which was looking at rehabilitation of the entire Kutch district. So building from tribal hostels, building from primary health clinics, building from investing into the handicraft sector and how the market and linkages were established, were all the roles that the Community Foundation took into its being. But you will have to look at creative communication, communicating to the right people, and you should have plans of how you are looking at COVID-19, post-COVID-19 rehabilitation space.
Okay, I think we have a little bit more time. Dr. Das from Kuch Bihar in West Bengal, he asks that, should there be alternative entrepreneurial opportunities related to agriculture to tackle the situation of surplus labor? Any views on that?
See, surplus labor, either the land is productive, or we have a skill, or we have an industry. At least in the Indian context, these are the three things that you can look at. At the moment, the handicraft sector is very severely impacted because the buying capacity or the wish and will for the consumer to buy handicrafts is reduced because everybody is feeling an economic uncertainty. I would have bought a particular piece of cloth, artwork, a fabric, if my economic uncertainty did not exist. Today, people are suffering from economic uncertainty, and they do not want to invest besides the bare minimum and keep the money that they have. So the bank deposits have not been impacted that much because people are not spending. And when people are not spending, the economic downturn intensifies. That's the one aspect of it. Now looking at the entrepreneurs, that leaves us skills in the agricultural sector and skills in the industrial sector. The industrial sector, the tragedy is that setting up an industry immediately is not possible. That leaves us the middle come, where we can look at how can we value add to the agricultural produce that we have. Can we do the first level of sorting? Can we do the first level of processing? Can we do the first level of chemical or pesticide or other kinds of cleaning that is required for the agricultural produce, so that the market is attracted towards buying from that micro entrepreneur? And that micro or nano entrepreneur will also find support from the government because in the agricultural sector. So we will have to rethink as to how do you do the value addition at the village, at the production site. During this course of my research, I was talking to one of the people who's a potato aggregator for Pepsi, Coke, Bicano, Bikaji, Haldiram. All the big players buy potatoes from him. He says the ease of doing business, and he's a direct procurer for potatoes from the farms in Bihar, UP, MP, Maharashtra and Gujarat. And his experience is that buying from MP, Bihar and Gujarat is much easier than buying from UP and Bihar, because even when they are given the ideas or hand-holding on how to produce their potatoes in a better manner with lesser investment, the years of agricultural training that they have had in the farms, which is low labor cost, they would continue with that than improving it. So civil society has a very big role to see how micro entrepreneurs and best inputs as far as information and knowledge is concerned is available to the farmer, and convincing the farmer to continue with that practice. And this is somebody who's actually buying potatoes. So he's the second level of the middleman between the potato growers and the potato customers.
Okay, Robin had a question. Is
about. Can I break in here?
Yeah.
So because I was trying to think through the relationship between short-term relief activities and organisations and longer-term development, and you've already discussed that in some detail, so we can just move on from it. But I think it's a really interesting point that there are opportunities to go both ways, to do short-term relief from the longer-term farmer groups and to turn the short-term relief activities and structures into things that can support longer-term development. So it'd be really good to explore some of those opportunities. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Robin. Then Dr. Jahangir Alam from Bangladesh, he's questioning your recovery model for India, which is a W-shaped recovery model. But he's saying that Bangladesh, they expect a V-shaped recovery. The response interventions seem close to similar. So
I do not have enough information to comment upon that.
okay.
So I would say the V-shaped, W-shaped, U-shaped recovery, whatever the recovery phase be, I would seriously request that if you can actually, the TechnoServe slides and they have recorded the presentation as well. If people who are interested, there's a link given there. I would suggest you go to the site, listen to the entire presentation, and they have done a fairly fantastic job of doing that.
Okay. Any more questions? If not, your last chance going. Okay then. I would like to thank Vikas. Thank Vikas.
There's one more question.
Sorry, one question before I was could close. So he said there's from Mizanul Haq, who's actually a ag machine producer. He's saying the super cyclone Amphan, continuous rainfall and COVID disruption, harvesting and post-harvest has increased. How to promote mechanization in harvesting? I think, you know, Mizanul, this is a difficult question for Vikas, but like she said, the coalition between private sector and the government sector and development partner could play a big role.
See, I would say one thing over here, and I'm deliberately being provocative and a little caustic here. When I say that the days where a farmer could grow something and expect somebody to come to his doorstep to buy it at the price he wants to sell it are over. The civil society, which thinks that providing just the information for growing better crops and growing them well and getting a good produce, and somebody will come and buy it at their price and with human rights respected and sustainability practices followed, are over. You will be, and that's one of the SDG goals as well. That's to work with collaboration. The collaboration between the farmers to form a farmer-producer organization. The civil society to act as a conduit for funding, information, marketing linkages, communication linkages, crowdfunding linkages is what the civil society will need to rethink itself as well. And the private sector to think that somebody will come and deliver the product at their doorstep without they asking questions on sustainability and human rights are over. These questions are going to become more and more important, and civil society will start to make a more and more important, have a more important role. But both civil society, private sector, and the small farmer will have to evolve into the second phase of how do they respond to the demands of the economy, so to say. If we do not respond to these economy demands, the private sector will, of which it does not respond, will perish. The civil society that does not do it will perish, and so will the farmer, small farmer, lose its farm holding and become a farmless laborer or a migrant laborer at another person's farm.
So you're saying no more business as usual. It has to change.
COVID has brought that very much to the fore.
Okay.
Business as usual will not work. I'm doing a piece of work for the Sustainable Trade Initiative. Companies are going to ask questions on human rights and sustainability, sustainable ways of producing agricultural commodities. If small farmer is not willing to look at the quality and the quantity produced and sorting at the farm level, he will or she will always remain the smallest cog, which can be most manipulated and never receive the funds, never receive the premium that his produce demands. So change will need to be there at a cross section of society in the agricultural supply chain.
Okay. Thanks, Vikas. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for coming in and sparing your time with us. I'll hand it over to Tamara now. She has some comments.
Before you do that, can I say something?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tamara, Robin, Kuhu, and the organizations I reached out to for giving me this opportunity to kind of do it. It was a learning exercise for me as well. And what I found particularly interesting was that from a learning perspective, that what I'm finding more and more true is that the business as usual, the days are very numbered. And if we do not seize the opportunity, we will cease to exist. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vikas. I really just quickly want to thank you for your presentation and your work. I think it's a really interesting kind of background, you know, the bigger context in terms of why there is not a lot of investment in the Eastern Gangetic Plains, and we have to think about what that means for our work, and I guess for, you know, farmers, and for scaling some of the technologies that we are promoting. And I also think, like Robin said, I think it's really interesting to think about how we can frame this work in terms of a COVID rehabilitation or reconstruction, whichever way we want to think about it. But it's more about how we frame the message, I think, to and promote it to others. So thank you for your time, and thanks everyone for joining us. And hope to see you at our next webinar next month. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.